Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. My point of this segment is it's not you I'm worried about, it's them. The number one goal, my absolute number one goal of this show, if you take away nothing else from having ever watched this show before, if I get fired tomorrow and you look back and say, oh yeah, I remember the Mike Slater show, he always talked about this. That would be the greatest honor ever. The one thing I would love for you to take away is to understand the depravity of man. People, you are not basically good. That is what the world views people as. Oh, well, people are basically good. No, far from it. Your heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Why is this so essential? This is the one thing I want everyone to understand. Why is it so important? Well, first, you need to understand how depraved you are in order to want a savior to save you. This is why the atheists got rid of this idea of the sinner and sin. Because if you don't need saving, then you don't need a savior. See how that works? But it also has political implications, right? Whenever there's a proposal for one of your liberties to be infringed upon, people always respond. And listen, progressives obviously say this, Democrats will say this, even conservatives will say this. And we need to stop saying this. So let's say there's there's a proposal from Joe Biden to track all the transactions in every bank account. Every bank account will be monitored by the federal government constantly. And they say, it's to track money laundering and drug trafficking or something, right? And what do most people say? Most people, even most conservatives, say, I have nothing to hide. That's fine, I have nothing to hide. Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, fine, great. I'm glad you're not a money launderer. It's not about you. It's about the people doing the tracking. That's who I don't trust. There's a lot of proposals, especially here in California, to put tracking devices on every car so they can see how many miles you drive and tax you per mile, right? And I'm like, I don't really want the government to know where I'm driving. And people say, why? I have nothing to hide. It's like, oh, gee, yeah, that's not the point. The Department of Justice just yesterday said that they are instructing the FBI, to investigate all threats made to school board members. And the school board administration of the country wants to label people who make threats at school boards, they want to label them domestic terrorists. Domestic terrorists. Now, you may be thinking, well, Slater, that's fine. That's not me. I'm not a domestic terrorist. Yeah, I know you're not. It's not you I'm worried about. It's them. And knowing what power does to a degenerate heart. It's not good to have so much power in the hands of so few and in the hands of so few people who have degenerate hearts. Are you with me? It's not about whether you have something to hide or not. You never want that amount of power in those people's hands, ever, under any circumstance. I got an example from today, and then I got an example from back in history. Right? So the today story first. There's a guy who works at Google X. This is where they do the moonshot programs, they call it. This is like the crazy technology that we can't even fathom. And this guy used to work there, and he's painting this picture of all these robotic arms that they developed, an arm farm, he called them. And these arms were tasked with figuring out how to pick up a ball, right? But they couldn't just pick it up like a robot, like that's easy, right? They had to figure out on their own how to pick it up like an actual human, right? With like the grace and form of a real human being, how it would pick it up. And these arms had to figure it out on their own and with artificial intelligence, and they couldn't do it. It took a couple weeks. And then one day, one of the arms figured it out. And then the next day, all of the arms figured it out. Did it the exact same way. This guy says, I suddenly realized this is really scary. Now, one day we can go into all the details of all the other artificial intelligence things that he sees for the future and all this stuff, and it's not good. But here's the line I wanted to point out. This is from the Times in London. When he first started working with artificial intelligence at Google, he thought, we are going to build amazing things that are going to change people's lives. But then came the arm and the ball. Quote, it completely froze me. He saw where this was going. The reality is, he says, we are creating God. That is the degenerate heart. It's a tale as old as time. Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. The first few verses of it, man builds up, then God intervenes and tears down what man built up. The people in the beginning of Genesis 11, they say, come, let us, which is such a great line. Come on, everyone, let us. That's man's great ambition. Come, let us. Right? That's man desiring to achieve self-glory, self-fulfillment, and it's all rebellion fueled by personal ambition and personal pride. One of the manifestations of our depravity is we think there is no God, or we think we are God, or we think we know better than God. And back in the day, we would build a massive tower, and today we build artificial intelligence. We think we're creating God. That will go poorly. That will go poorly because of who we are. Oh, I think I'm doing a great thing and we're going to help humanity. No, you won't. No, you're not. Let me give you a historical example. This one may be better for you. So modern sociologists and anthropologists, they start with the idea that man is basically good. So when man does something bad, they got to come up with a reason for it. I'll give you an example of this in media world. Whenever there's a school shooting, everyone in the media always wonders why. How could this have happened? And whenever there's a school shooting, my view is, oh, how is this not happening all the time, nonstop? Like knowing the depravity of man, you would think that there's school shootings every day, all the time, like dozens of schools, like all right. By the way, the etymology of depraved, it means crooked. That was the beginning of the word meant crooked, and then it came to mean more like emotionally and morally corrupted and degenerate, right? And so there's like, so if man's good, but a bad thing happens, well, there's got to be a reason for it, right? And then politicians come in, and because they think we live in utopia and we need to make utopia, and a bad thing happened, oh, how could this be? Well, it's because government wasn't big enough. It's because there weren't enough laws. We need more government, more laws. That will fix this problem here that shouldn't exist because people are good. But no, it's not about laws. It's about the heart of man. So sociologists, anthropologists, they think man is good. So when something bad happens, they need to know how. And the reason they came up with to explain all the atrocities from the Nazis is brainwashing, right? All the German people were brainwashed. That was their explanation of how these otherwise very normal German people ended up killing 6 million Jews and 11 million total people and threw them in ovens, right? How could that be? How could you take a normal guy in Germany and then he ends up like, they go do things like this and they're like, and it's brainwashing. That's their explanation. How did good people do bad things? There was so much Nazi propaganda that people went crazy and killed all the Jews. And they have to think that because they believe, the modern belief is that man is getting better and better. Man is on the ascendancy. Obama would always say something like, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. No, it doesn't. You hear things on the left, people say, we're on the right side of history. You got to be on the right side of history. Stuff like that, right? It's all in that same world. So the German people, they were all brainwashed. They couldn't even think straight because of all the Nazi brainwashing. It turned good people bad. You with me? The brainwashing turned otherwise good people bad. And my argument is, no, people are all bad. And it's the civilizing forces that exist in a country that makes people good. But it's hard work to make people good. People are not naturally good. They are naturally bad. And there's a lot of really important foundational things that exist in a country and a culture that make people good. Okay, let me tell you about this town. This town's called Jedwabne, Poland. This is my disproving this whole brainwashing theory of people. Jedwabne, Poland. So a little geography. You got Germany. I think we got a map. Do we got a map of this? So you got Germany on the east. Where's Germany? Germany, you can barely see it. Way, way, way far on the left-hand side of the map, right? And then in like the pink, you have Poland. And then you have Russia, basically. What was Russia, right? All those Russian Soviet countries, right? So you got Poland in the middle between Germany and Russia, right? Hitler didn't want to fight a war with Russia. This is 1939. Hitler didn't want to fight a war with Russia, so he did a truce, right? And you got Poland in the middle here, though. So what did he do? He invaded the western portion of Poland, the part that touched Germany. Right? So Hitler invaded the western part of Poland. But there was this town on the far eastern side of Poland. It was never occupied by the Nazis. It was right next to Russia, this town. Had nothing to do with the Nazis. Nothing to do with Germany, nothing to do with Germans, nothing to do with the Nazis whatsoever. There were 3,000 people in this town. Half of them were Jews, 1,600 Jews. The Jews lived there for 300 years. They were embedded in the town. Right? And everyone got along. They farmed together. They lived together. They worked together. They went to school together. They even intermarried. They went to the same social events. They broke bread together. They did everything together. It was a nice town for 300 years. 1941, Hitler breaks the truce with Russia, sweeps through Poland. And they took over this town. 2 weeks after they took over the town, the Gentiles in this town murdered every single one of the Jews. 1,600 of them. Killed them all, every last one, except for 7, which we'll get to in a second. And they did it in horrific ways. They beheaded them. They stabbed them with pitchforks. They wanted to kill them all in a day, and they couldn't kill them all by hand, so they herded them into a barn, poured gasoline all over the barn, and burned them all to death, incinerated them all right there. This is a picture of the memorial that is here today, and this is on the site of the barn. You can see some of the timber from the barn inside of that memorial. Now, sociologists were looking at this town, and they couldn't make sense of it. It didn't fit into their mold, right? Because again, their mold was people are good. How do these good people do bad things? Oh, they were brainwashed by years of Nazi propaganda. Okay, but this town didn't have any Nazi propaganda. There was no Nazi propaganda. The Nazis have never been there before. Not one of the Jews was killed by a German. Not one of them was killed by a Nazi soldier. Every single one of these Jews was killed by their neighbors. There's a book about this. It's called Neighbors by Jan Gross, if you want to learn more. So this is the question. How can, in a period of 2 weeks, these people go from friendly and fine to murdering all the Jews? It wasn't brainwashing. How do you have these otherwise good people that seemingly, essentially overnight, kill everyone, or half the town, all the Jews? How? The answer is simple. The Germans gave them permission. The Nazis came in and said, yeah, you can do that. And it wasn't about race for the people who killed these Jews. It wasn't about race. They didn't care. It was about worldly things. It was about farms, their tools, their homes, their money, their jewelry. They coveted and wanted to murder. This is my number one rebuke to people who think that people are genuinely good is you have the 10 Commandments, right? Religious or not, whatever. Here's a list of like really old rules. Why would it say don't covet, steal, lie, murder, dishonor your parents if people didn't already naturally covet, steal, lie, murder, and dishonor their parents, right? Clearly that's what we do, so they had to make rules against doing those things. And the same thing with these people. They coveted and they murdered. Why? Because that's what people do. And for all of their history together, they've been prevented from doing that on account of their conscience and their culture and their law. But now those things were gone. Coveting and murdering was now allowed. So the heart of man did what the heart of man does. There was no brainwashing necessary. That's already who they are. The 7 who were saved, they were saved by one Polish woman. So out of 1,500 Gentiles, only one saved the Jews. Think about that. So you had a lot of ringleaders, surely it's like any other mob. You have a lot of ringleaders, and then you got a lot of followers, and then you got some people who probably remained silent. You only had one person, 1 out of 1,500, which is about the right proportion, who actually actively went out and risked her life to save the Jews. That's probably about right. 1 out of 1,500 people end up actively doing the right thing in moments like this. This is what humans do when you let them. When there is no civilization to control people, when there's no religion, when there's no conscience, when there's no concept of God, when there's no law, it's over. And people don't get that. People today don't understand that because they think people are good. And we don't understand that to our own country's peril because we don't understand how fragile civilization is. You're a Jew in this town, you think everything's going great, and 2 weeks later, everyone's funneled into a barn and burned to death. How could that have happened? That's how fragile it is. And people don't get it. We take it all for granted. We just go on with our lives thinking that we're good. We're not. And as you actively undermine the foundations of civilization, which is what we do, people are going to be shocked when it all collapses and when people start acting by their heart's true desires. Let's make sure we don't fall for that. Let's make sure that we keep these foundations strong wherever you are. We have an app for your smartphone, and we have it for your TV, wherever you are as well. I'm super grateful wherever you're watching, but just know that we have this app, and you can take it wherever you go. Right? And it's super easy. You can open it up, easy to funnel through. Find your shows that you want to watch. You can watch live, of course, and then you can turn your phone off. Right? Keep your headphones on, driving, wherever you are, and everything's right here. You got Bill, Dana, Buck, Jesse, me. You can watch live, the whole gang. We got our favorite topics. We got the open mic. We got the special reports. Everything you could possibly need on the app, and it's totally, absolutely free in the App Store. Just search for The First TV. Spread the word. Hello, Slater Crusaders. Who decides what fake news is? We got a Don't Trust the Expert segment here. This is the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. This is the guy who last week said that parents are not. This segment's gonna be so good, we're playing it twice. This is the guy who last week said that you, parents, are not the primary stakeholder in a child's education. It's so mind-boggling, it's hard to fathom. These people don't think they're your kids. They don't think your kids are your kids. They believe that your kids are they're our kids, they're the government's kids to shape and mold as they know best. And I know it's hard to accept that because it's so bonkers, but that is the truth. One of the biggest divides between the left and the right is who best to raise your children. Who's best to raise your kids? And you look at the straight communist literature and proclamations from early communist days and late days as well. And it was all about kicking women out of the home to work and having the government raise children because they know best. And women, you should be free from the drudgery of the slavery of housework, and instead go work in the factories, and we will raise the kids and we'll do a better job of it anyway. That was the whole pitch. And to go back to our last segment, their selfish, depraved hearts truly think that they know best, that they're your kids. That your kids are their kids to raise however they want them to best be raised. It's amazing when you think about it. And most people, so you and I, as I just said that, you're like, oh yeah, that's sick. That's sick and awful. Most people either agree with that like this perspective, the far left perspective, go along with it mindlessly. They go along with it, right? So many people drop their kids off at government schools every day, completely outsourcing the education of their kids to these people who in many cases hate you. The teachers may be nice, yeah, but the people running the system, they actually hate you and everything. But we hand our kids over to them anyway. If an alien from outer space came and observed what we were doing here, they would see so many people hand their kids over to the government each and every day. And the alien would, of course, conclude that these people absolutely think that little humans that live in their homes are actually the government's to raise. Right? If an alien saw that, they would think they're like the government's kids, and the government outsources these kids to beds to sleep in. And then once they go sleep in the beds for a while, then they go back to the school where they belong, and that's where they eat and learn and are molded into people. And then for a while, they go back to these beds distributed across town, right? They have it backwards. But that's how we're doing it. They'd be like, why do these people drop these little humans off, no questions asked, every day at these government buildings? And just as we said about in the last segment, now that more people are starting to ask some questions for maybe the first time in their lives, the Department of Justice and the FBI decided that they may label you as a domestic terrorist. So that's how they feel about you asking questions. You could be a domestic terrorist. Anyway, distraction or sidebar. My point. This is the Secretary of Education. He tweeted out a CDC study, and the CDC has their fancy, weird, cartoon, faceless infographic with it and the whole thing. He said, a Wisconsin study found that schools that required masking had a 37% lower incident of COVID-19 than the surrounding community. That is the Secretary of Education advocating for masks with a study out of Wisconsin. Now, we have debunked, I don't know, maybe 12 studies over the last couple months about masks. Studies from schools, studies from salons, all these studies that the CDC puts out, and they're very easy to debunk. Do you want to know how you debunk them? You just read it. You read the study. All we've done here in the debunking process is quote the study. And the study is never what the CDC infographic says is in the study. Right? The CDC just puts out this cartoon, and people follow the cartoon, and they don't take the time to read the study. We've debunked probably a dozen of these things so far. They're all ridiculous. But you don't need to take my word for it this time. This is Tracy Hoig, if you pronounce her name that way. She's the lead author of the study. She wrote back, our study is not able to give any information about the role that masks played in the observed low in-school transmission rates. We had no control group, so we don't know if the rate would have been different without masks. So listen, it's one thing to listen to some radio TV schmuck on the radio TV talk about debunking and say, oh, Slater, what do you know? Are you a scientist? Okay, it's another thing for me. Okay, so first of all, if I debunk a study, you're like, oh, what do you know? You're an idiot. And it's like, okay, I'm quoting it. I'm quoting the study. Oh, Slater, you're misinterpreting it because you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a scientist. Okay, fine. What if I present to you the lead author of the study? Is that enough to debunk the Secretary of Education's interpretation of the study? If I have the lead author say, no, that's not right. So who do you believe here? The Secretary of Education, his interpretation, or the person who wrote it? And of course, she's right. There were no schools in this study that they looked at that did not require masks. So you can't compare the difference. If you had some schools that wore masks and some schools that didn't wear masks, you could look at the difference. This study only looked at schools that did wear masks. So you can't conclude anything from it. You can't conclude anything about the masks from it. Oh, Slater, what do you know? I'm the person who wrote it. Now, the reason I bring it up here, this tweet from the Secretary of Education is not fake news. Well, of course it is. But when he tweeted that out, Twitter did not mark it as fake news. What more could be fake news than saying, hey, here the study says this, and the lead author of the study says, no, it doesn't. Like that, how much, what? That's absolutely fake news, but Twitter did not take it down. Twitter did not put a label on it. Whenever you put something up, there's always like a warning label or whatever. They didn't do any of that. And the tweet remains. The Secretary of Education, inaccurate in his interpretation of the CDC study. That is fake news, but it stays. Okay, keep that one in mind. I got another one for you. A friend of mine, one of his coworkers, he's the husband of a 38-year-old woman who died from the vaccine. This is her obituary. By the way, she had a 5 and a 3-year-old daughter. I just want to read a little bit from her obituary. Jessica's greatest passion was to be the best mother possible for Bridget and Clara. Nothing would stand in her way to be present in their lives. During the last weeks of her life, however, the world turned dark with heavy-handed vaccine mandates. Local and state governments were determined to strip away her right to consult her wisdom and enjoy her freedom. She had been vehemently opposed to taking the vaccine, knowing she was in good health and of a young age and thus not at risk for serious illness. In her mind, the known and unknown risks of the unproven vaccine were more of a threat. But slowly, day by day, her freedom to choose was stripped away. Her passion to be actively involved in her children's education, which included being a room mom, was once again blocked by a government mandate. Ultimately, those who closed doors and separated mothers from their children prevailed. It cost Jessica her life. It cost her children the loving embrace of their caring mother, and it cost her husband the sacred love of his devoted wife. It cost God's kingdom on earth a very special soul who was just making her love felt in the hearts of so many. That was a real obituary from a person I know, or I know a person who knows him. That obituary, Twitter has tagged it fake news. Fake news. Deceptive. Unreliable source. FDA says vaccine very safe. You with me? Woman died from taking the vaccine. Very rare, of course, but it happened. Twitter says it's fake news. Secretary of Education posts a CDC study, and the lead author of the study says, no, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. No problem at all. That is our post-truth world. Welcome to it. I'm going to take a break here because we got great guests, but on tomorrow's show, I want to talk about distraction. We are so distracted by everything that we never think about eternity. Actually, that's why we like to be distracted, is so that we don't have to think about eternity. That distraction takes us out of the present, and the past is being rewritten in real time. This is a good example of the past being rewritten in real time. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he said, we forget everything. What we remember is not what actually happened. Not history, but merely the hackneyed dotted line they've chosen to drive into our memories by incessant hammering. So now we don't even have the past to fall back on. It's all being rewritten. And then we wonder why we're lost. We wonder why people are confused and anxious. What else could you be? What else could you be? Especially when the media and big tech and the government is lying to your face. Lying to your face. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's do a quick refresh on where we've gone so far today. It's a perfect setup to our next guest. We kicked off talking about the depravity of man and the depravity of the heart. Then we told the story of Jedwabne, Poland, where you had 1,500 Gentiles and 1,600 Jews living together in peace for 300 years, and then boom, just like that, all the Gentiles killed 1,600 Jews. How could that possibly have happened? Well, that's the depravity of man. On Friday's special, we'll talk more about it in the next couple of days, but we're going to interview Rod Dreher, who's the author of many books, The Benedict Option, and also more recently, Live Not by Lies. And in that book, he talks about the pre-totalitarian state that we're currently living in right now in America. And people who lived through totalitarian regimes before in Europe, they see what's happening in America today. And they're warning us. They're saying, listen, guys, we've seen this happen. You are currently living in a pre-totalitarian state. All that being said, well, let's give an example here. This is just, you may think it's a tiny example, a small example, a funny one even perhaps, but these are some activists who lied their way into Senator Sinema's classroom at Arizona State, I believe, and then followed her into the bathroom here.
We need a Build Back Better plan right now.
We knocked on doors. We need solutions. The Build Back Better plan has the solutions that we need.
We knocked on doors for you to get you elected, and just how we got you elected, we can get you out of office if you don't support what you promised us.
We need 7 million citizenship for 7 million. We need the Build Back Better plan right now.
I'm a survivor of human trafficking, And it's because of the lack of worker protections that we don't have in the gig economy. I need you to stand by workers. Lots of people who are like me who became homeless.
Build back better, pass the bill. Build back better, pass the bill. Build back better, pass the bill.
So you have activist articles, newspapers saying in the past they would say, we got to stop bullying and you shouldn't go after politicians. And now they're saying that they need to attack and literally bully Kristen Sinema. Amazing. Rabbi Yaakov Menachem is here. He's from the Coalition for Jewish Values. Rabbi, how are you, sir?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And I'm doing great. How are you?
Good to talk to you. What do you see when you see activists like this act the way they act?
It's incredibly scary. If we lose the ability to distinguish between people rallying and expressing their own voice and intimidation and bullying and shutting down the voices of others, I mean, you don't have to go back too far to find German people who acted exactly as these protesters did. I mean, it's just so completely inappropriate, walking into a bathroom. But people shouting down Jews, we don't have to go back a century to see where that leads.
Yeah, draw that distinction for us, because I've never, it's so obvious, really, but I've never drawn it as clearly as you just did. Our views versus shutting down someone else's views. Can you?
Well, to hold a rally, that's fundamental. That's First Amendment in America, and it's also just a basic concept. Everybody should have the ability to gather and express their own opinion, even in a large rally demonstrating huge popular support for whatever opinion it is that they want to present. It's something totally different to shut down the voices of others. They're shouting and screaming on college campuses when an Israeli speaks or when Ben Shapiro speaks. I mean, where does that come from? Unfortunately, you go back, like I said, less than a century, you've got robust models of the Sturmabteilung shouting down people who opposed the Nazi agenda, and that helped Nazism to spread because your crazy ideas don't get rebutted.
I want to speak on that just to drive home the first point. And what's crazy is that the second thing you talked about, the shouting down of people's views and whatnot, that's still they put it under the umbrella of freedom of speech, but it's not. That's not what freedom of speech should be or is really.
Correct. Freedom of speech means I get to express my opinion. You're shouting down somebody else's opinion. That's not expressing your opinion. That's not your speech. That's you using your voice in the same way that a bull uses its.
Yeah. Tell us about that German word you just spoke of, and what did this group of Nazis do?
The Sturmabteilung is the Nazi stormtroopers. They were the Nazi brown shirts. Early in the Nazi era, they would go into where other people were congregating and shout them down and make sure that no other voices could be heard except the Nazis. That's how you lose dialogue. That's how you lose a First Amendment. That's how you welcome in totalitarianism.
They really did. They shouted people down, just like the idiots we're seeing today.
Yeah, this level of intimidation, that picture that you're showing on the screen is, that's exactly who these guys were. That was the mission. Shout down, shut down. I mean, obviously, they went on to physical violence, but it started. It's not as if they haven't gone on to physical violence on campus either.
Yeah, the intimidation is the key point there, because your opinion should not be. Well, this is crazy. This is what the left's done. They've weaponized that. So if someone gives an opinion, they say that's hurtful, harmful. It literally causes me physical harm and distress and all that. If someone voices their own opinion.
Unless it's an opinion they like, in which case it's an important voice that needs to be heard.
And they can physically shout down what they don't like. Correct. And that's not intimidation. But that's, of course, what it is. Speak to the intimidation factor, because that's really important.
What they're doing, notice the redefinition of vocabulary there. When, I think we've made it, it is clear to everybody that shouting down somebody else isn't expressing your own opinion. That's not what the First Amendment allows you to do. The First Amendment allows you to express your voice, your opinion, to your own audience.
I went to a speech from Dennis Prager the other day, and just to switch gears a little bit, perhaps. And he talked a lot about how liberals and conservatives share similar values. And the example he gave was freedom of speech. Like a classical liberal believes in freedom of speech. Like even like someone like a Bill Maher, right? Flaming atheist, but believes in freedom of speech. He's like a classical liberal in that way. But liberals vote for leftists, and leftists don't believe in freedom of speech or anything that conservatives believe in. What shall conservatives do to appeal to moderates, people who don't pay attention, and or even liberals, to get them to see how important these values are and support more conservative?
Well, Democrats are, now it's a compilation of classic liberals and these leftists. Dennis Prager, who you mentioned, draws that very clear distinction, that real liberals are people who you can talk to. Traditional values, you go back, 2 generations at the most, and we're talking about bipartisan values that Americans agreed upon. And these are the things that made America great. I mean, I will, of course, say, look at the biblical view. Values like cherishing human life and choosing peace over warfare and universal literacy and education and universal justice and family and social responsibility. All of these are the core American values, and they're not new. They're not progressive. There's nothing that we have very ancient models that we could be working from, but there's been a lot of cultures that obviously detoured from there considerably.
Why, this is philosophical, and I dig it. Why is a progressive so antithetically against these ancient models? And we can do both. We can do the biblical model, and or just because it's old. Like they're against it because it's old. Progress is their identity.
I think you just answered.
We see the truth in what was.
Yeah, I think you just answered your own question. That it's the fact that it's old. Something new has to be better. The same way that new cars are better than old cars and new computers are better than old computers, new ideas are better than old ideas. But obviously, it does not work that way.
No. I can see the old computer, new computer, sure. But not when you have, there's no such thing as truth. That's to say, we have biblical truth and we have historical truth, but if you don't believe in truth, then you can easily reject all those things, huh?
Right. You only have your truth. There's no objective truth. There's no set of reality that we have to accept. We have our new ideas. Look how much progressivism disdains actual fact when it contradicts the narrative. They say follow the science. Okay, we now know, which we didn't know when Roe v. Wade was decided, that a baby in utero can recognize the voices of his or her parents and will continue to recognize his or her parents outside the womb. That is obviously a thinking, hearing human being in utero. That's called following the science.
Last question for you, Rabbi. What is a shouted down person to do in this culture?
It's hard, but you have to refuse to be shouted down. You have to point out how uncivilized and barbaric it is to engage in that. Honestly, I feel that now Kirsten Sinema has an obligation to refuse any deal that isn't precisely what she asked for. It has to be that the people who did that to her recognized that it backfired colossally. That anybody who thought that this was justifiable recognizes that this backfired hugely, because now she wouldn't bargain. She wouldn't negotiate. She demanded what she wanted, or she voted no. And that is how it has to be, because reasonable people can have a negotiation. But the idea that bullying and intimidation could win now places a moral imperative upon her to not engage in a dialogue that otherwise would be totally reasonable.
Yeah, good point. Rabbi Yaakov Menachem, Coalition for Jewish Values. Rabbi, great to talk to you, sir.
Thank you much.
Have a fantastic day. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusader's got Jason Aldean coming in hot on politics, and he's got enough money to. He said, so let me get this straight. It's no longer our decision as parents or free Americans to make decisions about our kids. Gavin Newsom gets to make those decisions for us. You gotta be kidding me. People in California should be outraged, and people everywhere better start standing up and speaking out now. This is not how America and being free works, talking about the vaccine mandates, obviously against them. Joe Williams is here. He's the president of Vanguard Field Strategies, Republican political consultant. Joe, how are you, brother?
Doing good, man. How are you?
Good to talk to you. I thought going into the California recall that this was a winning issue, at least in California, and maybe the rest of the country is different. All the masks, vaccine mandates coming, et cetera, et cetera. And he won 70% of the vote, right? So it's crazy. So do you think in the rest of the country, being against all these mandates and vaccines being the latest, do you think that's a winning issue?
I do. I think for the rest of the country, what folks are seeing is that fundamental change that the Democrats have talked about now for a while. Sort of started with Obama, continued with Hillary, obviously Biden and Harris was a talking point. But now we're seeing what fundamental change looks like. The quote that you read from Aldean talking about how this is not how America works is 100% accurate. It goes against everything that this country is all about.
Do you think there's enough people who see, even because most people are vaccinated, right? So do you think there's enough people who are vaccinated who are also against vaccine mandates?
Absolutely. I think folks that choose vaccinations really by and large do so because it's a decision that works for them and works for their family. I have several friends that have done it because they, have an in-law that stays there, or maybe are susceptible to disease and such. But even if you ask and speak with those people, it's a good choice for them. Doesn't mean they believe it's a good choice that must be mandated for everyone else.
I hope people see that it's not even about the vaccine itself. It's about what will become a type of social credit system where you have to engage in certain types of government permissible behavior in order to be allowed access to society, right? Like that's the fundamental thing here. It's right. The government says you have to do these things in order for you to go to the store. That's a as Aldean's referring to, that's like a fundamentally different thing than we've ever had in America ever.
Absolutely.
How should Republicans articulate that?
So I think that you're right in that this is just a tool. And by the way, it's just the tool that they're using now. In a couple of years or maybe even a couple of months, as crazy as things are, there will be something else that is used, as you said, to sort of restrict the flow and ebb that folks normally do with society. I think what Republicans can do is capitalize on this notion that somehow parents aren't the best decision makers for their kids. I think folks, here in Texas where I live, there's the old saying that you can do a lot, but you can't come after our kids and our guns. What the Democrats have done here with expanding these restrictions to kids is really put parents in a decision point where they have to decide who's really going to decide what's best for my children. Is it me, or is it a bureaucrat in Sacramento or in Austin or in DC?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm trying to figure out where most people draw their line. Everyone draws a different line at a different place, right? And mine was obviously very early in all this stuff. Some people's were masks, some people were masking kids, some people were vaccinating adults, some people were being forced to lose their job as adults, some people, and I think this is what I'm getting to, is that I would think almost everyone would draw a line at forced vaccination of kids. That seems to be, even pro-vaccine people, pro-mask people, I would think a majority of people would draw a line there. Do you agree, and or do you see a different line that most people draw that Republicans can capitalize on?
So I think there are a couple. I think we're seeing some folks willing to not let their job, their career, their business, and being required to be vaccinated in order to earn a living. I think that's one line that we're seeing. Certainly with kids, I think that's another. I think there's yet another with churches. Frankly, what's to stop church flow? I mean, you can't hold service unless a certain percentage. You show your vaccination card to get in. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And at this point, I think folks were willing to be accommodating and willing to kind of do what's for the greater good, is what we were told and what was drilled in us. But at this point, what's worth the greater good if life isn't worth living with all of these excessive mandates?
That's right. Yeah, we've given them a mile, unfortunately. Joe Williams, President, Vanguard Field Strategies. Joe, appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I heard someone say the other day, it's 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and the first 19 months of that is nothing compared to the next 19 months of our 2 weeks to flatten the curve. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.